The spiritual world is always present next to us, whether in crowded places or in the countryside, but whether we can see them or not, whether we can communicate with them or not, depends on fate of each person. A story about encounters with ghosts while working at a construction site told by a brother. 4 years ago, he was a construction worker. His job was to pile up concrete piles, a test to measure the settlement of concrete piles. The specifics of this job were that he had to be on duty 24/24 at the construction site, so eating and sleeping was difficult. Often in the middle of the fields and during his time working on that project, he also met and witnessed many spiritual stories. He said at that time, one day he was assigned to go to Bakjang to make 4 concrete piles there. The project was in the middle of the field. The whole project was like that, but in the evening he was alone there, the first night. Normally, nothing happened on the first night. On the second night, around 1 o'clock at night, he was lying in a hammock dozing off, when suddenly someone pulled his hammock, startling him awake. I thought it was the consultant supervising them to check. But he got up and looked at the phone light around the machinery area. There was no one there. Then he went to lie down again. After about an hour while he was lying down, someone was swinging him and he fell from the hammock. He was so scared that he couldn't sleep anymore. He looked at the clock. It was just after 3 o'clock in the morning. I just went to the compressor and sat down. I don't know how to describe the feeling at that moment. The wind was blowing very cold. The moon was naturally hazy about 20 to 30 meters away. There was a middle-aged figure, wearing clothes from the past, but not today, standing and waving at him. He asked who is that, but there was no answer. He just stood there waving his hand as if beckoning here or that. He stood up and was about to walk over there. He had only taken a step or two and then suddenly he was at the robotic compressor. The hydraulic system made a ding sound, as if someone was holding a hammer to hit the steel plate on the body of the machine. He was startled and turned around to check. He looked at the light for a while and there was no problem. When he turned around, he saw someone. I couldn't see the wave from before. I looked at the clock and it was almost 4:30 a.m., so I felt less scared, so I lay down in the hammock to sleep again. He had just fallen asleep, when he dreamed that a guy wearing construction clothes came to ask for a cigarette. He was half asleep and half awake and took out a cigarette to give it to them. After that, they smiled at him and left. He asked, "Are you on the contractor's side or which side?" He didn't answer. He was startled to wake up at 6 a.m. and even more strangely, the cigarette was still on the leg of the robot. At noon, some people from the piling company came. I told him the exact same story. The machine driver told me that the day before there was an accident where the hydraulic oil line opened and oil sprayed out and got on a person who was repairing the machine. And died on the spot, but he didn't know which machine it was, because he came in later and heard that story. Hearing that, he felt cold all over and asked someone to buy some incense and fruit for him to offer. Always on that machine. The next story is that he was scheduled to paint and do a static compression test on 6 concrete piles. Because he was already working hard, the company let him bring in a new worker. This guy's name is Long. Experienced, and went with him to learn the job. When we arrived at the construction site, it was nearly 10 p.m. The two of us were also hungry, so we said we would quickly finish installing the machines and then go buy food. By the time I finished installing the machine, It was after 11 o'clock, so I asked Long to stay and watch the machine so I could go find a restaurant to buy food. When I left, Long went around the construction site to check. Does the top of the pile have to be cut or not? Because before going to buy rice, I told him to check. When he bought the rice, he gave him a plate with 3 oranges. He asked, "Where did you get it?" He said, "I went to check the stake, but I saw it was left in the ground, so I brought it home. There were 5 fruits but I ate 2 of them, I left the rest for you." I asked, "Where did you get it?" "Let me go there and see. Because I go to construction sites a lot, I know that it is an offering to the dead." It led him out and he observed that it was a lot of land outside the construction site. It had been leveled so he didn't see anything unusual, but he still didn't dare to eat. At noon, the 2 brothers tied 2 hammocks on both sides under the robot machine to sleep. He slept well without any problems, and when Long woke up, he said he was drenched in sweat, and that night it was him. He slept and dreamed that a child was standing and staring at the hammock of the dragon. After looking for a long time, the child walked closer to the hammock. As soon as he touched the hammock, he was startled awake. It was only 3 a.m. So I didn't want to wake the dragon up. I sat with my phone on and listened to music. In the morning, I asked him if you slept well last night. He said, it was good, but there were a lot of mosquitoes. Hearing that, I also rest assured, I think it's probably okay. The next night, it was drizzling and cold because it was autumn. He was too cold to sleep, so he took out his phone to read the newspaper. At about 1 o'clock at night, the battery was low, so he plugged it into the backup charger and tried to lie down. I slept for about an hour or so, then I woke up because it was too cold and I couldn't sleep. I looked over to the other side of the hammock and didn't see the dragon anywhere. He went around looking for it but couldn't find it. He took out his phone to call and saw the bell ringing 30 meters away, in the ground where he had picked up an orange plate. At that time, he was scared but still tried to shine the light to see if it was there. Walking there, when he got there, he saw it holding clay and making it round like an orange. He was about to tell it to go back to the hammock to lie down when it brought it to its mouth and ate half of the lump of clay. He said, "What are you eating, dragon?" He fell to the ground, his clothes were covered in mud because it was drizzling. He woke up and saw that he was bewildered, panicked and coughed, spitting up dirt. He told him to go back to the computer. Suddenly, he muttered under his breath, "We have to come up here because of our family earn a living. If you offend anyone, please forgive us." At around 6 a.m., Long had a severe stomachache, so he called the supervisory consultant and asked him to call a taxi for him to go home. Then that night, he was alone and he was scared, so he borrowed the key. Lock the cabin and sit inside, lock the door, but you can't avoid it. Every time around 2 to 3 at night, under the machine, you can hear a clanking sound like someone is destroying things, but because you're afraid, you stop. Never mind, I think at this time, even if I encounter a robber or an addict, I'll just ignore it. But in the morning, nothing was lost, everything was still the same. After nearly a month of time off work, Long said, while I was sleeping, a child came and asked for 2 oranges back. He was eating them and I took them away, so he took me out to pick another orange. When I ate the clod, he was picking the orange and giving it to me to eat. About 1 to 2 months later, the last winter of the year was drizzly, so it felt much colder. He was sent to Bakjang to test the static compression of 5 concrete piles, just like every other time, that day. At 10 a.m., he arrived at the place where the equipment and machinery were installed. At around 11 a.m., he stopped to eat and waited for the supervision consultant to come check in the afternoon before starting the experiment. His first impression when he came here was that it was very deserted, located in a field that was being planned for construction. About 1 kilometer away, there were a few tents of the construction team. They set it up to live in, but the day he came up when they returned to their hometown, no one lived because the construction site was temporarily paused, waiting for experiments to be completed before construction could continue, so he was the only one staying at the construction site. During the day, a guy driving a robotic pile press machine came to help him put the compressor in. Once he did, he also left. The first night, because of the cold drizzle and he was lying in a hammock under the machine, he couldn't sleep. Every time he fell asleep, he had sleep paralysis and heard the whispering voices of many people. Sometimes it sounded very far away, but other times it sounded like it was right in my ear. Having a lot of experience at construction sites, he pretended to sleep and lie still, listening. By about 4:30 a.m., he was completely silent and couldn't hear anything anymore. During the day, sometimes a supervisory consultant came to check, so there were people there. Talk to avoid mud. The next day, he fell asleep at 11 p.m. Because he was up the night before, he was very sleepy the next day. At around midnight, he couldn't remember what time it was. Suddenly, the cold wind blew like he opened the refrigerator door. It's exactly like that cold wind blowing on you. He was startled and sat up to see that there had been a company driver sitting there for some time. He clearly remembered the company's people because at that time he saw them wearing the company's reflective vests and protective helmets. It's been broken. He asked, "What are you doing out here if you don't sleep at night?" But he didn't hear him say anything. Half awake, half dreaming, he lay down on the hammock and suddenly the person asked, "Have you been doing this job for a long time? You said it's been 3 years already. Do you have any medicine? Can I have one? I left the medicine in my backpack so I could smoke it." As he spoke, he pointed in the direction where he put his backpack, not paying attention to whether they were smoking or not. It was almost morning and they said, "Go to the tent over there tomorrow night. Sleep there, don't lie here, it's dangerous. Then give me your phone number, I won't save the name, just write down the number." The next night, because the rain was heavier, he took the robot's generator for lighting. It was raining in the hammock, so he walked into the tent of the previous construction team. When he lay there, he didn't get caught in the rain, so he didn't get caught in the rain. I slept until morning, thinking nothing happened. Who knew that when he woke up in the morning to check the machine, the rainwater short circuit burned all the wires, but the hammock he was lying on was right next to the lighting power line. If he had been lying here last night, he might have died, suddenly. He took out his phone and called that person. The subscription was incorrect or had not been used. That's when he felt really scared. Waiting for everyone to come and solve the problem, he got in the car and went straight home even though he hadn't finished yet. Ends the static compression process. The next story he encountered was in Taibin. At that time it was the beginning of the 7th lunar month, the month that we construction workers were very afraid to go, but because of mandatory work, we had to ignore it and go to work, with special features. The disadvantage of static compaction work is that you have to be on duty 24/7 at the construction site to monitor the settlement of the concrete piles. Even a slight error will later affect the construction work, so no matter what happens. Also, I don't dare leave another place while I'm working. This project is a spontaneous cemetery that was moved by the government to be planned as an export processing zone. When I go to work, that place is converted to another place. It's all leveled up, the whole area is thousands of meters wide, surrounded by deserted fields, right? There were 7 concrete piles there. According to the compression process, I had to stay there for 7 days. The first day was normal, nothing happened. By the second night, he had constant sleep paralysis. Every time he lay down, he shivered. Once he started to feel his head spin slightly, he knew it was about to happen, but he didn't have time to react because after shivering with his head spinning for about 1 second to 2 seconds, he felt sleep paralysis, so he didn't have time to sit up. At that time, I was completely awake, not in a half-awake, half-dream state. The only difference between normal times was that I couldn't open my eyes and couldn't move my limbs, but I still heard and felt everything around me. Seeing the chaotic sounds of loud people and children as if they were running around, he tried to get up but couldn't get up. When the alarm rang, he suddenly could move again, his arms and legs were sweaty. Shirt is all wet. At that time, it was just after 2 o'clock at night, but he couldn't sleep anymore. Occasionally, a stray cat would pass by the machine, startling him, so he just sat there until morning. By morning, he was a bit tired from staying up all night, so he had to eat. After lunch, he took a hammock to take a nap. While he was dozing off, he dreamed that a man wearing ancient clothes came to him and asked with a very angry look, "Why did you chase me away?" he said. "I don't know anything. I just followed orders and came down here to measure these piles. I've been here for hundreds of years, even though there's no one to worship me. I'm the leader here, I can eat with the people here. Now everyone's been chased away and my place is gone. Someone took him away, so now he's all alone." While listening to that, he was startled awake by the phone ringing. He was sweating all over. He clearly remembered the dream and the conversation, but he couldn't. I remember this man's grandfather's face. I was scared, so I called the company to ask to change people, but it couldn't work, because each person had a different project and no one was left at the company. He said if I don't change people, I would like to quit, but the director said he would try to stay. After 2 to 3 days, when the other guy comes home from work, he comes down to replace him. Hearing that, I try to stay longer. At night he couldn't even sleep. He spent the whole afternoon looking for a tree to sit on at night and light a fire to relieve fear, until the next night he couldn't stay awake anymore because he was too tired, so he fell asleep when he lay down. When I slept, I saw him again wearing ancient clothes. "Don't be afraid, I won't harm you. I see that you have a predestined relationship, so I asked you a favor. I said you will be back in 2 to 3 days. You won't help me. What can you do? Tomorrow afternoon at noon, 2 people will come down here. I'll take them to your place in the field." At that time I couldn't control myself and followed this man myself, feeling at that moment it was both real and false. Virtual, real in that it's like talking to a normal person, unreal in that you follow him but feel like you're not walking, don't feel tired, don't feel any leg fatigue. When we got there, he said, "Here's where you lie, tomorrow I'll show the other 2 to help you." After that, he stuck the tree branch in there. After saying that, he suddenly woke up. It was 4 a.m. When I tried to check the machine, my sandals were wet. I was startled and thought about that dream, but I was afraid to go out because it was still too dark. Waited until nearly 9 a.m. before he dared to go out there. There was indeed a tree branch stuck in the corner of this land. The strange thing was that the surrounding ground was soft and moist, but there were no footprints around. When he saw that, he returned to the machine area and didn't want to stand there any longer, intending to leave immediately, but in his heart he couldn't bear it, so he just lay there to continue working and see if that dream was true. That afternoon, lying in a hammock, he slept soundly from the moment he fell asleep until he woke up without dreaming about anything and also without any sleep paralysis. In the afternoon, around 4 p.m., from afar he saw a car coming. He didn't know who was he who was still sitting in the static compression area. When he got down from the car, it was exactly two people from the investor and the construction site who came to check the progress of site clearance and finalize the construction date. I was so scared because it was just like the man in my dream said so. I texted the company and told him everything and asked for the director's opinion. The director said to go immediately and buy some fruit, incense, lamps, and clothes. Offered to them, then the director called the construction site command board directly, then from the site command board called the two people in the car. After about 10 minutes of being on the phone, those two people came to him and asked if that was the case. After confirming that the story was true, they asked him to take him there and call someone else to buy fruit and incense. The light came, after getting there and walking around the tree branch to check. After about 30 minutes, a guy on a motorbike arrived carrying fruit, incense, clothes and a paper horse. Then all four of us joined our hands together to pray. The investor's brother prayed and said that tomorrow morning he would call an excavator to take him to a new, cleaner house. Please rest assured and bless our brothers at work. The school went smoothly. After finishing about an hour, all three of them got in the car to go home and told me to just stay here and work, not to worry about anything. Tomorrow morning we would send the excavator to come, and that night when I slept, I didn't see any symptoms, just came. It was almost morning when I saw him again, only to see him clasping his hands in thanks and smiling. Then he turned away and that's when I woke up. The next morning, at 7 o'clock, people from the construction site arrived, including the shaman. They spread the mat there and performed the ceremony. After the worship was finished, the shaman asked for a yin and yang, and then the excavator arrived. They scooped it up for the third or fourth time and found real bones, but not complete, because the bones were almost mixed into the soil and only the big bones like femurs and skulls were clearly visible. The teacher looked at him and said that he had a predestined fate and that the superiors blessed him a lot. The next day, someone came down to replace him and he went home. From then on, he never dreamed of seeing him again, but his feeling from that moment was onwards, I encountered more unexplainable luck. For example, going to a party at 3 a.m. and coming back drunk, falling off the bike into a stream, completely sinking the car, hitting the rock on the face but still being able to walk home before falling down. The next morning the family had to go pick up the car. Come on up, everyone says it's bad luck. I was drunk last night and fell into the stream but didn't die. In the 9th lunar month, the company sent him to work on behalf of another person because the other person was sick at the construction site and couldn't work. The company reported that, but he also understood that there must have been a problem with the construction site. Because I also had to call someone else to do it many times for that reason. When he got there, he was relieved because he thought this project was too close to the highway and there were houses not too far away, so he also thought the other person was just sick, not like he thought. It was nearly 4 p.m. After the handover was completed, the other person followed the company car home, and he stayed to continue working. That night, he slept in a hammock and can't remember how long he slept because it was 6 hours later. I just had to record the data, so he slept comfortably without paying attention to the time. The cool breeze at night made it easy to fall asleep. He could lie down for a while and fall asleep. At midnight that night, he dreamed of two people, a man and a woman. Because it had been so long, he couldn't remember every detail. He only remembered that his clothes were torn and covered in blood. He was so scared that he was about to run away. That person said, "We are very hungry and just want to ask for food." He said that there is no restaurant open at this hour. After saying that, they cried and turned their backs to the highway. In the morning, when he woke up, he still felt normal and didn't think much. At noon, he went back to sleep and had the same dream. At that time, he felt a bit scared. He called the other person to ask how the situation was, but the other person didn't say anything, just said he was sick, probably afraid that his superiors would know that he would be disciplined, so he didn't bother to tell. In the evening, when he went to buy rice, he deliberately bought another box, because he was afraid that if they asked him too many times and he didn't give it to him, it would be a sin. That night, he tried not to sleep to avoid being afraid. Looking at the surrounding houses, it was only 9 p.m. and the electricity had already been turned off. He went to sleep. By 11 p.m., he felt sleepy, so he put it away. Phone and sleep. Around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, I had a dream again, but the dream still saw those two people coming near where I was lying. They were crying. The woman said, "I miss my family but don't know the way home." The man said I was blinded by someone and couldn't see the road, so I crashed into a car. "I'm very hungry right now." He remembered that there was one box of lunch left. He pointed to the box and said, "There was another box of lunch. To eat your food and leave me alone so I can work." After speaking, the two people picked up the lunch box and started eating in a hurry. They said, "We're still hungry. I miss home and want to go home but don't know how to get there." He asked where home was and said it was in the province. Quang. After speaking, a rooster crowed and he woke up. As soon as he took the bottle of filtered water and poured it into his hand to wipe his face to wake him up, there was a foul smell from somewhere and he couldn't find it. After a while, he remembered that he had opened the lunch box. It spoiled all the rice, the food smelled bad, and from 7 p.m. the night before until 5:30 the next morning, even if it was hot, it could not have spoiled that quickly. After looking at the lunch box, thinking about last night's dream, I just wanted to run away and not do anything anymore. I waited until 7 a.m. when a grocery store opened and ran out to buy a bottle of water and asked if there had been any accidents recently. No, the shop owner said that there are a lot of deaths over there. There are accidents all the time but people are dead. Not even a month ago, there was a couple that I heard from Jian Quang came here to go to a friend's wedding. When he returned, both of them died. At that moment, my whole body was cold. I sat down and told my doctor about the whole dream. He was also scared. Then I found the person who called that family that day to report the accident here to ask if they still had the phone number. Then luckily the other guy still had the number in his phone, so he called his family to perform the ceremony and call the soul back. After that day he only dreamed exactly once again, and that was to see those two people standing from afar looking at him waving their hands. After saying hello, I didn't see anything anymore. He stayed for 4 days, then finished his work and returned home. And also the last spiritual event that he went to do this job, after that time his family forced him to quit and not let him work anymore. One day in the middle of 2018, I was sent to work at 3 stations in Sun Lane. That place was close to a police execution shooting range. At first, I didn't know and thought it was just like other places, guys. The person from the pile pressing company didn't say anything. They just saw that the installation was complete and then they left and told us to call us when they move another pile. The first night he lay there, he felt something was wrong. Every time he fell asleep in the middle of the night, he would hear cries, and sometimes the sound of pebbles and stones being thrown back at the place where he lay, making him unable to sleep at all night. This construction site does not dare to be very close, sitting all day without seeing any consultant or supervisor come to check, so he sleeps all day and stays awake at night. I was sleeping around 1 p.m. when my hammock flipped over and I fell to the ground. I thought I was fast asleep and didn't pay attention, so I fell, so I lay down on the hammock and continued to sleep. After a while, I heard the sound of a man laughing. Grandpa, he kept asking me to go out and play around. I said I couldn't leave my job in case the building subsided and we couldn't bear the responsibility. But he still waved his hand and invited me to leave. It's time for him to, just as he was about to get up to follow, a pebble from somewhere stuck to his feet, startling him, and he sat up, only to realize it was just a dream. But after several years of experience staying overnight at construction sites, he also vaguely realized that this place had a problem. I called and asked the guys at the deposit settlement company, but they said it was nothing, it was because I was weak-minded, that's why. I thought it was probably so I didn't think too much about it. That night, he sat looking at his phone until 2 o'clock at night and the battery was low, so I brought out the backup charger to plug it in. While lying in the hammock waiting for the phone to charge, he fell asleep without realizing it. While sleeping, he dreamed about something. At noon, he came and asked me to go out again. My house is nearby. Come over to my house to play. He still refused because he couldn't leave the machine position, but for some reason, he kept looking at his face. That's why I can't help it, it's like sleepwalking. As he was daydreaming, he stood up and followed a few steps, then suddenly another person, also a man, ran from behind and took his phone and charged it, so he stopped following and turned around. He chased after the person holding his phone. He kept chasing but couldn't overtake him. If he ran fast, that person would also be fast. If he slowed down, they would also slow down. He clearly remembered running after a car. The house was very small. I don't remember clearly what was inside, I just remember seeing a bed. My phone was on the bed. At that time, he suddenly felt tired from running for a long time, so he lay there and slept. The next morning, the manager at the shooting range came and discovered him lying on a grave right near the entrance. He was still covered with a sack, half covered. He said he tried to shake him awake, but he was so feverish that he couldn't get up, so he carried him in and spread the wind and oil all over his body. At noon, he woke up completely. He asked, "How did you get in here? There's such a high fence around the door and the door is locked." He didn't understand anything. When he told me about the dream, he said, "So that's it. It still has some honesty left." Then he went to that grave to burn incense, then told him to go home and not do it again. And that afternoon, he took the bus home and quit his job. It was only later that he realized that if that person hadn't taken his phone and ran away that day, he would have followed that guy, and that day. Now there will no longer be a chance to tell this story again, and this is the end of the story. If you find the story interesting, please give me one like and one subscriber. I hope everyone has fun listening to the story. See you all in the next videos. Goodbye.